The past is not dead. It isn't even past. William Faulkner knew what he was talking about. He was born and raised in Mississippi in the southern United States. If you want to understand the current essence of history, the southern US is a textbook case study for continuity and change. And Mississippi was and remains the deepest South to be found. Now, my own personal experience, I will admit, is in slightly shallower territory. Wilmington, North Carolina, is the small port town where my grandfather grew up and where I now spend a solid chunk of every summer with my family. This is where we indulge in fried chicken and peach pie on Saturdays, where we drown in air saturated with humidity and collectively cringe when we pass Confederate flags on the highway. It's true, it's happened several times. North Carolina is not Mississippi, and it certainly isn't Faulkner's Mississippi. But my experience there has taught me enough about the southern US to understand exactly where Faulkner was coming from with his assertion. If you're less familiar with how to distinguish the southern US, I would recommend using your ears, not your eyes. The slower and more sprawling the intonation, the more you doubt you are actually hearing English being spoken, the deeper in the South you are. Now, too often, past and present, we are brainwashed by beautiful images plastered over hideous realities. These images are all the more compelling when they are sustained by what is authentic but does not tell the whole story. This is the view from my back porch. And yes, Wilmington is as idyllic as it appears here. Sunny in weather and spirit, endowed with stunning sunsets and fresh seafood and southern hospitality. But guess what? It's not the whole story. Because over 100 years ago, Wilmington was the site of the only political coup in United States history. Politics, action, alleged sex scandals, this story has it all. But the bigoted scheme it sprang from, despite ardent efforts, has never been completely erased. For racial discrimination is alive and well in the US today, and too many types of persecution remain unaddressed all around the world. History is a perpetual work in progress. If we want to improve, we have to pay attention while we proofread. So let me tell you what happened in Wilmington. Picture the US, even decades after the Civil War, still taut like a guitar string from residual political and social tension. The Republicans in the South are mainly black, while virtually all whites in the South are Democrats. And finally, there are the populists, who are the disgruntled farmers along for the ride. During the 1894 statewide election, the populists merged with the Republicans in an effort to defeat the Democrats. And you should understand that the Republicans and Democrats we are talking about have nothing to do with the eponymous American political parties today. So during this election, this fusionist coalition succeeds in defeating the Democrats, and it is here that the first storm clouds arise. Because the Democrats are furious at having been defeated. Their bitterness leads 9 well-respected, affluent white supremacists to conceive a 4-pronged plan for regaining power for the Democrats. So, what are the 4 steps of this plan? Steal the 1898 statewide election, incite rioting and violence to the detriment of Wilmington's black inhabitants, stage a political insurrection to officially seize power from the fusionists, and banish all opposition. Now you might be asking yourself, this is a response to a statewide election, so why are they targeting the city of Wilmington in particular? Well, if you actually are asking yourself that question, it's a great question, and I'm glad you're paying attention. So, aside from being an important city commercially and economically, as a port town, Wilmington was North Carolina's most salient example of black power and prosperity. You have to imagine, it had black police officers. 10 out of its 11 eateries were owned by blacks. 20 out of its 22 barbershops. There was a higher literacy rate among black men than among white. All this, when less than half a century earlier, virtually every black in that city had been enslaved. All right, fair enough. How did they put this plan into action? Well, one of the Secret Nine was the Honorable Josephus Daniels. He was a prominent North Carolina newspaper editor at the time we are talking about. So he did his part by generously diffusing propaganda, sexualizing black men, and portraying them as threatening. And he would also organize the occasional racist protesting gathering on the side. In general, the Secret Nine had a whole lot of friends in high places. So what did they do? Well, they used these connections to bribe railroads and corporations to give them support, and they promised them that they would cut their taxes once they had successfully stolen the election. So, in other news, these Secret Nine, these real-life Nazgul, implement their plan using money and status. Now, I'd like us all to please take a moment to be thankful that no politicians ever do such things today. Well, this is my point, right? Some things don't change. But at least we can take a moment and be thankful that this phenomenon is confined within the borders of the great United States. Well, wrong again. Let's move back to the past. It's less controversial. All right, so the Secret Nine are doing pretty well on their own, realizing this evil little scheme of theirs. But they have a stroke of luck when August 1898 rolls around. Anyway, Alex Manly was another inhabitant of Wilmington, and he happened to be the only black editor of a daily newspaper throughout the entire US. So around this time, a Georgia feminist made the statement that black men had to be lynched in order to protect white women. Manly, as a black man, an educated black man, was made pretty angry by this assertion. And so he published an inflammatory editorial which asserted that black men were in fact often lynched as a response, as in order to cover up what were scandalously consensual relationships between black men and white women. So, on his own, Manly made a lot of people very angry, but it didn't help that the Secret Nine decided to use him and frame him as a rapist of white women to raise tensions in Wilmington. And boy, are tensions rising. September, October. And now, talented white supremacist orator Alfred Moore Waddell gives a speech in which he says, "We will never surrender to this ragged raffle of Negroes, even if we have to choke the Cape Fear River with carcasses." This gives you an idea of the hatred we are dealing with. And now, it's November. Election day arrives. Any blacks who are brave enough to even try to vote are violently suppressed by the red shirts, a lovely paramilitary wing of the Democratic Party. But just to be safe, just in case, the Democrats also decide to stuff the ballot boxes. So, to no one's surprise, they win the statewide election. And now, Wilmington has reached its breaking point. 48 hours later, Manly is supposed to present himself to a committee of whites headed by the choker. But he has fled for his life. Understandably, I would say. So when he doesn't show up, this committee turns into a mob, morphs into a mob that storms his newspaper office and razes it to the ground. This act of destruction and violence triggers rampant rioting all around Wilmington. And in the midst of the chaos, the choker, Alfred Moore Waddell, takes over the city by forcing elected officials to resign at gunpoint. Now, no one knows just how many were killed on that fateful day in November. Some estimates go as high as 300. It is known that at least 1,400 people fled the city. 1,400 black inhabitants fled the city as a direct result of the violence, of whom at least 21 were forced into exile, forced onto trains, and forced to leave their homes and families behind. Did I forget something? Oh yeah, no whites were harmed on this day. Zip, zero, zilch. Bad enough, you may say. I agree with you. But it's actually worse than this. We have to look at the bigger picture. It is the following year that North Carolina implements the first of its legislation in order to officially disenfranchise African Americans. And within a decade, every Southern state has followed suit, surreptitiously voiding the 14th and 15th Amendments to reassert white supremacy. What am I saying here? Consider this the epitome of a fundamental negative mentality change. The white South could not bear to recognize blacks as equals. On this one day in November, the only coup in US history took place, and no one was ever held accountable. This is far from the most gruesome of the neglected pages in the tome of world history. It is not the most violent or shocking occurrence. However, it is a crucial example of the ripple effects that small-scale injustices have. Wilmington falls, North Carolina falls, the South falls, back into inhumane discrimination, back to the proud trumpeting of white supremacy. Okay, that's pretty bad, but we're still talking over a century ago, right? Why does it matter? It's kind of abstract, unnecessary, irrelevant, boring. Except today, black men are still murdered on the streets by law enforcement for wearing hoodies and carrying toy guns. Today, black churches are targeted by delusional shooters. Today, black schoolgirls are forced by police. They are manhandled like murderers by police for refusing to give up their cell phones in class. The only way for justice to be served, past or present, is for us to be aware. Forgetting the past is neglecting and avoiding the present. The past is not dead. It isn't even past. Today, we have all heard Faulkner's wise words, and now it is past time we listened. Thank you.